Well, today is Friday the 13th. Ooh, hope you're not superstitious. Friday the 13th, and it is 12:49, and I want to finish up chapter 7, and we should be able to do that. I was able to do that this morning in my face-to-face class. That worked out really well. And so we will finish chapter 7. And as I shared with them this morning, we will begin the review on Monday and finish that. And then I anticipate that the test will open on Wednesday, the 18th. So the test would be available for Wednesday, the 18th, the 19th, and the 20th. Then you would have the weekend, and then you would be heading home sometime the 23rd or the 24th. So that you would then have the third exam out of the way, go home, rest up, have a nice Thanksgiving, eat lots of turkey, and then when we come back on the 30th, I will begin the next lecture, and the material for the final will cover chapters 8 and 9. And then I anticipate there could be some supplemental information that I will be adding to the information on the PowerPoint that will just supplement some areas that we're talking about. So I think that I will begin now. And we're going to start with page 125 of the PowerPoint. And we're going to start with the different types of readers. Now, we have talked about the anatomy and the physiology. We've talked about the infant and the toddler and how talking and language begins. We have talked about the child who is in preschool, and now we're into the child who is going to school. I want you to keep in mind that in the state of Indiana, we don't require children to go to preschool, for sure, and I don't think that children are required to go to kindergarten. So keep in mind the disadvantage that a child might have if they are unable to go to kindergarten or preschool. The preparation is going to be very different, and they may be at a bit of a disadvantage. It just sort of depends on what kind of stimulation, what kind of, and I don't want to say teaching, but stimulation, interaction the child has at home. So chapter 7, types of readers. There are 3 types of readers. We have emergent readers, we have developing readers, and we have independent readers. Now, you've heard me talk a lot about the introduction of literacy in a child's home and how that can happen in many formats, and the importance of that literacy exposure and introduction early on, and the influence that has on academics and the child's performance in school. And I cannot impress upon you enough the importance of the literacy exposure. I'll never forget, I was working First Steps, and I was going to a home in which both parents were there, and there was The one child I was working with, I'm not sure if there was a second child. Both parents were probably in special ed. They probably went through the special ed system in school. Nice people, nice people, but I'm not so sure that the priority was the children. And the reason I say that is because um, the the attention that they were not given, um, the exposure to TV and videos was probably excessive. Um, I don't know if either parent worked outside the home, I'm not quite sure. But when I was talking to mom, and part of my responsibility as First Steps was to do parent training and encouraging them how to stimulate their child, how to make a good environment that was conducive to learning. So I asked the mother, how how many books do you read at night to your child, or do you read books, or how often do you read books or something? And the response was she didn't read books to her child, and I'm not sure there were books in the home. So I wrote a goal, behavioral objective, that mom would spend 30 minutes a day reading to her child. That was the first time I ever had to write a behavioral objective or short term, long term goal, ever, forever goal, or whatever. So I certainly brought books in, and I demonstrated to mom how to interact with her child to take advantage of the books. Now we know that there are certain ages at which children don't do well with books. And part of that is during that emergent reader, that early stage. They don't sit for very long anyway. And depending on the type of the book that you have, they may want to scurry away and you don't see them for a while. But it is partly our job to try and bring that child back to the story, to sit longer, to increase the attention span to the books. The child who is very active, who doesn't sit for very long, who doesn't pay attention, who is unable to attend, and not in a selective way, but who truly is unable to attend. And that could be due to a chemical imbalance, that could be due to the child isn't getting enough sleep, the child is dealing with allergies. I'm not really sure, but the child just is unable to sit and concentrate. So the more that we can encourage that child to come back to that story, the better off we're going to be, not just with reading that book or working with that book, but certainly on down the line when it comes to other academics. In the case of this family, I had to show the books to the child. I had to introduce literacy and books to this child because the child had not been exposed. Books that use the same words over and over and over again, books that have pictures that supplement what is printed on the page, are of choice for obvious reasons. We know that children, smaller children, like those little chubby books, I call them, and they have actual photographs of babies or objects. The word is below the object. They have great primary colors. They're not the neon green, the salmon orange colors. They're true orange and green, red and blue colors. And they they have pages that are thick, but they're little, but they're easy for little fingers to turn. And I will tell you, you don't have to go through every page. And certainly I maybe wouldn't, because the child hasn't been accustomed to sitting and looking at books. So you might really need to temper that a little bit. But these kiddos who are emergent readers, hopefully after a short period of time, they will figure out that there are stories and that there are pictures and that we do have some consistency with the story and with the words. They like to try and read. And one thing that I really do love to see is when the child gets the baby doll, they have a baby doll, a stuffed animal, maybe their dog, and they have a story and they're pretending to read the book to the doll or the dog or whatever. It's so sweet. Well, what that tells me is that child knows what to do with that book. That child has been exposed to that book. They're beginning to recognize certain words. And I wonder if you can think of an author, a very famous author, who writes children's books where words are repeated frequently. Frequently. And we know that that's real important for children. Think about in preschool the repetition of activities, material, what they're hearing, the activities that they do. They do them over and over and over again, and it may be an everyday activity. You sit on this circle, you do the calendar, you talk about the weather, you maybe have story time. So it's the repetition that helps them to recognize certain words. This emergent reader stage is between 38 and 40 months. So they're not quite 3, and they're just around 4. So these are active children. They are children who move around a lot. They're not yet reading, but they like to pretend to read. When we're working with this group, as I said, we need to be selective with the books that we're using. We want nice pictures that illustrate what we're talking about, and we want material to be repetitive. Our developing readers certainly would be past 4, and they are now reading for meaning. Now remember, you've probably heard me say, in the beginning, children are learning to read. And this developing or this emergent reader is sort of within that range. They're learning to read, And we're into developing readers who are learning to read. We're beginning to see that there is some letter sound association. And remember, that's a prerequisite for learning to read. They are encouraged by stories that talk about life experiences. For example, taking a trip to the zoo when my baby brother was born, my trip to grandma's visit, things like that. Learning to ride my bicycle, things that they can relate to, excuse me, will help to keep them more engaged in what it is that you're trying to talk about. We're trying to help them figure out some unfamiliar words. We're working on phonological awareness and decoding. We're trying to help them learn to figure out what those words might be. We're reinforcing the alphabet, the names of letters. We're talking about a little bit of comprehension, and we're talking about a story that may have a beginning, a middle, and an end. We're talking about vocabulary and what words mean, especially if they're words that not all of the children know. You're building on that base for reading to learn is what you're doing. Independent readers. Well, that's where most of us are. Independent readers. We enjoy reading. We're reading for pleasure. We may be reading different kinds of material. fiction, nonfiction. We may be reading biographies. We may be reading things about history. Uh, it is endless, but we're reading for pleasure and we're reading to learn. It takes us to far off places, that's for sure. I was talking to somebody in the office yesterday, and they were talking about their child who is very interested in the early scuba gear, where the divers would wear these big helmets and they had just a small area with which they could see out. And they had these big puffy suits that were on. And I anticipate there was maybe oxygen that was blown into the suits. And the child was so fascinated with these early scuba outfits. And then, so they were going to look that up and was very interested in King Tut and the Egyptians. This is a child in kindergarten. And so this child is able to make a connection between, oh, wow, let's find out about this. Now, I would like to see that child with a book in its hand. And I know that you can get on the internet and you can find just about anything that you want, and which is good. It's not a bad thing, but I'm the kind of person that I want that book. I want to go to the library. I want to look it up. Um, I'm so old school, but I'm also very tactile. I don't want to read a book on the internet. I want to hold that book. Um, I like to feel my pen on paper. I don't want to always type it. It's a sensory thing, I know. But children can learn so much and can go to so many different places. Um, as you know, the child who's getting into third grade, fourth grade, the expectation is that they will be more independent. So you have to have good reading skills, or reading skills that will at least allow you to read an assignment that you're given. Um, Reading and writing work together. The more you write, the more you read. The more you read, the more you write. And you have to write down assignments. Um, so you have this foundation in the lower grades, and now you're in the fourth grade, and you're having to apply independently what you've learned. The tie, the connection that binds reading and writing together is meaning. And isn't that what our communication is all about? What does it mean? The the binding factor between reading and writing is meaning. Now, do you remember, out of the 5 areas of language, pragmatics, phonology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics, which one is meaning? I hope you know we've talked about this a lot. I hope you all in unison said semantics. Semantics is meaning. The tie that binds reading and writing together is semantics, is the meaning, and that's what it's all about. And quite honestly, I think that would be a great true-false question. I could also make that into a multiple choice question as well. When we get into having to write narratives, writing certainly becomes very important. Uh, and our children do have a natural interest in writing. We certainly know those kiddos who have not had experience with writing utensils for a variety of reasons. Sometimes the parents aren't watching closely enough and the marker gets where it's not supposed to be. Maybe they can't afford to buy paper and crayons. There are a variety of reasons. Or maybe they didn't grow up with crayons and coloring books, and so they don't think to buy those things for their children. But children do have a natural inclination. They're interested in drawing and writing, and certainly when they get to school, they're going to be writing their names. This is how I think I am. This describes me. This little quote is on page 129. It's the top slide. The physical process of moving the fingers and hands to put letters on paper. Physical process of moving fingers and hands to put letters on paper is closely related to drawing, in that writing and drawing are both processes of symbolization. And I like the feel of that pen in my hand. I like the way that pen glides across the paper as I make loops and dips and I cross the T and dot the I. I like the way that it feels. And these early experiences with writing utensils, it's the foundation for our writing. Making circles. Well, think about making an O. The child's just scribbling, just scribbling. Think about making O's. They think about making an A. Think about making a G. Those are all skills that need to be in place for learning to write. Now, by the end of kindergarten, teachers expect children to be able to write their full name, both upper and lower case, and we're talking about spelling too sometimes, and we expect the spelling to be accurate, and also we may see some words that are spelled phonetically that they have maybe not learned or they haven't learned the rule, but they're trying their best to come up with the spelling of that word. So these kids should be writing many of the alphabet letters. They may have more difficulty with small lowercase letters than the uppercase letters, but they are expected to learn both uppercase and lowercase. Sometimes it's difficult to make that shift from uppercase to lowercase. Or when do you use uppercase? When do you use lowercase? Letters that we don't use frequently, a Z, a Q, they will have more difficulty with those. And how you place the letter on the line. Some letters are between lines, some letters are halfway in between and go below the line. Kiddos will have more difficulty with vowels because they don't know how to write ooh. What's an ooh? Ooh. They don't know. And if you were to think about it, if you were to spell goo or goop, Goop, now spell shoe, which we have as the same S-H-O-E. Well, it's not two O's. So you see sometimes the confusion and sometimes the rules that our kids are trying to learn. They have more success with an initial consonant than they do a final consonant. They hear that first consonant clearly, and then the brain begins to process that information. By the time they get to the last consonant, they're not real sure. Children will typically learn to write their name first, of course. Put your name at the top of your paper. They're also going to learn mommy, daddy, Sissy's name, the dog's name, Nana's name, their favorite food, their favorite TV show, whatever. But they're going to start with their name first. And these familiar words will be different for most children. Some will be similar, but some will be different. Not every child calls grandma Nana. Not every child calls her Mimi, grandma, Grammy, granny. So there will be some similarities, but it will be very specific for that child. As children are learning to write their name, they're learning the alphabet, they're talking about letters that are uppercase and lowercase, they're really becoming interested in spelling. Spelling is the next big issue. There are 4 stages that are involved in spelling, and just to summarize them, we have a pre-phonemic stage, we have an early phonemic stage, we have a letter name stage, and a transitional stage. And the pre-phonemic stage, and if you look at that word pre-phonemic, Can you tell me which one of the 5 areas that the word pre fits in? Semantics, syntax, morphology, phonology, and pragmatics. Which one of those 5 language areas does pre, as in pre-phonemic, fit into? Pre. Think about it. I hope you're all thinking of morphology, prefixes and suffixes. In the pre-phonemic stage, the child doesn't seem to understand that longer words may have more letters. They know that it means something when we put these sounds together. The letter association, B says B, D says D. It's not real strong yet, not real strong. Just this nice, easy introduction. The early phonemic stage, it's a little bit better. They've gained some knowledge, a little more sophistication about spelling and sounds. They will attend to the first letter of a word that represents the entire word. I was working with a young boy in the clinic, and this has been several years ago, and oh my gosh, he just struggled with letter sound association. It just made no sense to him. I truly believe he heard those sounds differently. I suspect he could have been on the autism spectrum, and I think he may have also been dyslexic. We did not evaluate him for that, and as he got a little bit older and became a teenager, he didn't come to see us after that. I think that, and he was homeschooled, and I think he just, as he got into those adolescent years, just wasn't cool to come to the clinic anymore. But in that early phonemic stage, if he was reading, and he could read some, if, let's say that there was a story, and the story had the word dog, dirty, digging, drinking, and let's say that we had worked on the word drinking. So we were reading along and we were taking some turns reading, and we really came to the word dirty because the dog had been in the yard digging for bones, and he got very dirty, and then he needed to go get a drink, whatever. But every word he had learned, the client had learned the word drinking, and every word that he came upon that started with D, he said it was drinking. He had the first sound, but never even attempted to decode that word. Now, and in the beginning, he would look at the pictures because they're going to look at pictures to get cues. But that didn't last very long. And it didn't matter how many times we went through those words and talked about the configuration of the letter T and the Y. The dog has 3 letters. We did everything. Didn't make a difference. He still struggled with letter sound association and sequencing those sounds. Dog, dog, dog. He just really couldn't get it. So he was better at picking up the last sound, but the middle sounds were no good. And once he got past a couple of letters, as he was trying to decode, he just gave up. Letter name stage, the child represents vowels and consonants with letters whose names sound like speech. Here we go, making more sense. And in the transitional child, the child attempts several spelling strategies, may remember how he saw that word spelled before. He might try and apply some rules if he knows one. He may make mistakes that shows he's generalizing some strategies, doesn't quite have it, but problem solving is taking place, and he's trying to sound it out. He experiments with spelling. If I said, Billy, spell the word phone, it could be F-O-N or F-O-N-E. That P-H, you can see the child sit. The child is sitting there and he's thinking about that word, silently going over it. Phone, F, F. You may see him go, uh, B, B, A, B, E. And it may be B-A-B-E. Well, I'll take it. I can work with that. I can teach that. But if you call every word you see on a page that starts with a B, baby, we're in trouble. That's a much more difficult task to teach. And if we are into dyslexia, the schools now are working with that, and we can hopefully get some help for the child. Our language is complicated. We have different ways to spell T-H-E-R-E, T-H-E-I-R. You gotta know the difference. You just have to know the difference. W-E-A-R, W-A-R-E, like warehouse. It's difficult. Our language is difficult. There are different stages in the writing process, but I don't have those on the PowerPoint, and I have no intention of really reviewing those. As our kids get into upper elementary, middle school, and high school, they're writing more narratives. We know that they're learning more morphology. They are writing more difficult and complicated sentences. They're writing about things they're interested in. The spelling should be improving. Sentence structure, syntax should be improving. They should be able to generate a narrative that has a plot, a beginning, a middle, and an end. But one thing that I think that we don't spend enough time on is how to edit that narrative. How do you fix, let's say you've turned your paper in and the teacher has corrected it and has indicated this isn't a complete sentence, this is a phrase. And remember, a phrase doesn't have a subject and a predicate. And then they don't know how to edit. They don't know how to make the changes. That's a big, heavy language demand. It sure is. And it's a heavy demand on cognition, memory, linguistics, meta-linguistic knowledge. Remember that meta-linguistic knowledge includes cognition, your ability to perform and excel academically, memory, and you're trying to monitor, you're trying to perform a task that maybe you don't even know how to perform. And I see that in students, I've seen that in students in the past at the college level. I've taught this class for several years, and when we were doing our language analysis papers, the number of students who could not write a complete sentence, they had no idea about commas. They didn't know how to punctuate. They didn't know the difference between T-H-E-R-E and T-H-E-I-R. The misspellings. The ability to write something in a chronological way. It was like the inability to even know where to begin. And I don't think that we spend enough time in our schools on helping you navigate those narratives and how to edit. It takes time, and I will agree with you, but I think we need to spend more time with our students in school in doing that. Okay, I think that's the end of chapter 7. Took us about 34 minutes. I think that you will be ready for review on Monday. As I said, I believe the test will open on Wednesday. the 18th, you'll have the 18th, 19th, and 20th. So, hope you have a good weekend. And the next time that we're together, I will be doing a lecture over review. Have a good weekend. Stay safe. Wear your mask. Bye.